The distant thunder of hooves echoed through the dusty streets of Redemption Creek as Vivian Adams clutched her weathered Bible to her chest, her heart pounding in rhythm with the approaching danger. The year was 1876, and the promise of a new life in this frontier town was quickly unraveling into a nightmare as three men outlaws who had been trailing her since she'd witnessed their robbery, 2 towns over, closed in on the small churchyard where she now found herself trapped. Vivian's chestnut hair had come loose from its careful arrangement, wild tendrils framing her face as she backed against the weathered wooden cross that marked an old grave. Her traveling dress, once a cheerful blue calico, was now dust-covered and torn at the hem from her desperate flight through the town. At 22, she had seen enough hardship to know when death was approaching, and it was approaching now in the form of these men who wouldn't let a witness live. "Ain't no use running, Miss Adams," called the leader, a scar-faced man whose reputation for cruelty had spread throughout the territory. "You've seen our faces. Can't have you talking to no marshal about what you saw in Willow Springs." Vivian's throat went dry as she glanced at the church behind her. The door was locked, Sunday service long finished, and the pastor nowhere to be seen. The small cemetery offered no hiding place, only stone markers and the shadow of the church spire stretching across the yard as the sun began its descent. "Please," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I won't say anything. I was just passing through." "You know that ain't how this works," the man interrupted, pulling his revolver from its holster. The metallic click of the hammer being pulled back echoed in the still air. Vivian closed her eyes, a prayer forming on her lips, when the sound of another horse approaching caused her to look up. A tall figure on a midnight black stallion came into view, silhouetted against the setting sun. The rider moved with the easy confidence of a man who knew this land and its dangers. As he drew closer, Vivian could make out the details: a worn leather vest over a faded blue shirt, dust-covered denim, and a Colt revolver holstered at his hip. His face was partially obscured by the shadow of his hat, but she could see the determined set of his jaw. "Gentlemen," he called out, his voice deep and commanding, "I believe you're trespassing on hallowed ground." He dismounted with fluid grace, positioning himself between Vivian and the outlaws. The leader sneered, "This ain't your business, cowboy. Ride on if you know what's good for you." The stranger's hand hovered near his revolver, but he didn't draw. Instead, he took a step closer to Vivian. "The lady is under my protection now," he stated, his voice leaving no room for argument. Then, turning slightly so only she could hear, he added softly, "You're safe under my watch now, madam." For the first time since the outlaws had spotted her in town, Vivian felt a flicker of hope. The stranger stood tall and unwavering, his presence radiating a calm strength that seemed to push back the encroaching danger. The leader of the outlaws spat on the ground. "3 against 1, mister. And who might you be that thinks he can stand against us?" The cowboy removed his hat, revealing dark hair with a slight curl to it, and striking blue eyes that seemed to pierce through the growing twilight. "Name's Isaiah Brooks. Some call me the Raven for how I've been known to circle those marked for justice." He replaced his hat. "Now, I'm giving you boys a choice that the Almighty himself might approve of. Seeing as we're on church grounds, ride away and live, or stay and meet your maker a whole lot sooner than planned." The 3 outlaws exchanged glances. Even in the fading light, Vivian could see uncertainty creeping into their expressions. Isaiah Brooks's name clearly meant something to them. "You're bluffing," said the leader, but his voice lacked conviction. In one fluid motion faster than Vivian's eyes could follow, Isaiah drew his revolver and fired. The shot knocked the gun from the leader's hand, sending it spinning into the dirt. "Next one won't be so merciful," Isaiah warned. "Now ride." The leader clutched his stinging hand, his face contorted with fury. "This ain't over, Brooks." "For tonight it is," Isaiah replied calmly. With curses under their breath, the 3 men mounted their horses and rode off, but not before the leader turned back with a final threat. "We'll be seeing you both real soon." As the sound of their horses faded into the distance, Vivian felt her knees give way. Before she could fall, strong hands caught her shoulders, steadying her. "Easy now, madam," Isaiah said, his voice gentler than before. "They're gone for the moment, but we should get you somewhere safe." Vivian looked up into the face of her rescuer. The last rays of sunlight illuminated features that were rugged yet handsome, a straight nose, high cheekbones, and those striking blue eyes that seemed to hold stories of the frontier she could only imagine. "Thank you, Mr. Brooks," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "You saved my life." Isaiah nodded, a small smile touching his lips. "Just doing what any decent man would. Now, if you don't mind my asking, why are those men after you?" Vivian's gaze dropped to the ground. "I witnessed them robbing the bank in Willow Springs 3 days ago. I was visiting my aunt there and was across the street when it happened. They killed the teller." Her voice caught. "I testified to the sheriff before I left, but they must have found out." Isaiah's expression darkened. "The Clayton gang. They've been terrorizing these parts for months." He looked toward the direction the outlaws had disappeared. "They won't give up easily." "What am I going to do?" Vivian asked, the reality of her situation settling over her like a heavy blanket. "I was traveling to meet my brother in Sacramento. I don't know anyone here." Isaiah considered for a moment, then gestured to his horse. "First, we need to get you off the street. There's a boarding house run by a good woman named Mrs. Patterson on the edge of town. She doesn't ask questions, and her walls are thick enough to stop most trouble." Vivian hesitated, glancing at the stranger who had just saved her life. In Boston, where she had grown up, accepting help from an unknown man would be scandalous. But this was the frontier, and different rules applied when survival was at stake. "I don't have much money," she admitted. Isaiah's expression softened. "Don't worry about that now. Let's just get you to safety before those men decide to circle back." He helped her onto his horse before mounting behind her. Vivian stiffened slightly at the proximity, but the warmth of his presence and the security of his arm, reaching around her to hold the reins, provided a comfort she desperately needed. As they rode through the deepening twilight toward the edge of town, Vivian couldn't help but wonder what fate had brought Isaiah Brooks to that churchyard at precisely the moment she needed salvation. And more pressingly, what would happen when the Clayton gang returned, as they surely would. The boarding house was a 2-story structure with a wide porch and windows glowing with warm lamplight. Unlike many of the hastily constructed buildings in Redemption Creek, it had the solid look of something built to last. As they approached, an older woman with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a practical bun stepped out onto the porch. "Isaiah Brooks," she called, her tone suggesting both familiarity and exasperation. "What trouble are you bringing to my door this time?" Isaiah dismounted and helped Vivian down with gentle hands. "Mrs. Patterson, this lady needs a safe place to stay. The Clayton gang is after her." The older woman's expression immediately softened as she took in Vivian's disheveled appearance. "You poor dear. Come inside. Quickly now." She shot Isaiah a look that Vivian couldn't interpret. "And I suppose you'll be needing a room too?" "Just for tonight," Isaiah replied. "I'll be moving on in the morning." Something in his tone made Vivian turn to look at him. There was a resignation there, as if he had already decided on a course of action that he wasn't entirely pleased with. Mrs. Patterson led them inside to a cozy sitting room, warmed by a crackling fire. "Sit down, child," she said to Vivian. "I'll get you some hot tea and something to eat. You look ready to collapse." As the woman bustled off to the kitchen, Isaiah removed his hat and ran a hand through his hair. In the lamplight, Vivian could see the weariness etched into his features. "Mr. Brooks," she began, "I can't thank you enough for what you did, but I don't expect you to put yourself in further danger on my account." Isaiah's blue eyes met hers. "Those men won't stop, Miss Adams. They've killed for less than what you witnessed." "Then what am I to do?" she asked, fear creeping back into her voice. Isaiah was silent for a moment, then spoke with careful deliberation. "I know these territories better than most. I can help you get to Sacramento, to your brother." Vivian's eyes widened. "You would do that for a stranger?" A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Let's just say I have my own reasons for wanting to see the Clayton gang brought to justice." He looked away into the fire. "Besides, a lady traveling alone in these parts is asking for trouble, even without outlaws on her trail." Mrs. Patterson returned with a tray bearing tea, bread, and some cold meat. As Vivian ate, the older woman pulled Isaiah aside. Their conversation was hushed. But Vivian caught snippets about riding away from your past and time to stop running. When Mrs. Patterson showed them to their rooms at opposite ends of the upstairs hallway, Vivian paused at her door. "Mr. Brooks, I want to know what I'm getting into. Who are you, really?" Isaiah's face was half in shadow as he stood in the dimly lit hallway. "Someone who's seen too much of what men like the Claytons can do," he said finally. "Get some rest, Miss Adams. We leave at first light." That night, as Vivian lay in the unfamiliar bed, she found sleep elusive. Her mind kept returning to the moment in the churchyard when all hope seemed lost. And then the appearance of Isaiah Brooks, like some avenging angel from the pages of her Bible. There was more to his story than he was telling. But in that moment when he'd placed himself between her and danger, she had felt a connection that transcended their brief acquaintance. Outside, the wind whispered through the town, carrying the promise of a journey that would change both their lives forever. The first light of dawn was just beginning to streak the sky when Vivian was awakened by a soft knock at her door. She had finally fallen into an uneasy sleep only a few hours before, her dreams filled with pursuing riders and the piercing blue eyes of her rescuer. "Miss Adams," came Isaiah's low voice through the door. "We need to leave now." Vivian dressed quickly in the same travel-worn clothing from the day before, splashed water on her face from the basin, and twisted her hair into a simple knot at the nape of her neck. When she opened the door, Isaiah stood waiting, his expression grave. "What is it?" she asked, immediately sensing something was wrong. "A rider came through town an hour ago," he explained as they descended the stairs. "The Clayton gang hit a stagecoach 10 miles east of here yesterday evening. They're getting bolder, and they're still in the area." Mrs. Patterson met them in the kitchen with a bundle of food and a spare canteen. "I've packed you provisions for 2 days," she said, pressing the package into Vivian's hands. "And I found these." She held out a simple blue dress and a shawl. "They belonged to my daughter before she married and moved to Oregon. They should fit you well enough." Vivian accepted the clothing gratefully. "I can't thank you enough, Mrs. Patterson." The older woman waved away her thanks. "Just promise me you'll be careful. And you," she turned to Isaiah with a stern look, "bring yourself back in one piece when this is done." Isaiah nodded, though Vivian noticed he made no verbal promise. Outside, 2 horses waited Isaiah's black stallion and a chestnut mare that pawed at the ground impatiently. "Mrs. Patterson's son-in-law left the mare when he came through last month," Isaiah explained, as he helped Vivian secure her meager belongings. "She's a good mount, steady on rough terrain." As the sun began to rise over the distant mountains, they set out, taking a trail that led west out of town. Vivian, who had grown up riding in Boston's parks but had little experience with Western travel, found herself appreciating the smooth gait of the mare as they left the town behind. "We'll avoid the main roads," Isaiah explained as they rode. "It's a longer route to Sacramento, but safer. We'll follow Redemption Creek north for a day, then cut west through the foothills." "How long will the journey take?" Vivian asked, trying to match his easy posture in the saddle. 5 days if we push hard. A week if we're cautious." He glanced at her. "Your brother, is he expecting you?" Vivian nodded. "Isaac moved west 3 years ago, after our parents died. He's a doctor in Sacramento now. I've been living with our aunt in Boston, but when she passed last month..." She trailed off, the grief still fresh. "Isaac is the only family I have left." Isaiah's expression softened momentarily. "I'm sorry for your loss." They rode in silence for a while, the rhythmic sound of hooves and the rushing creek beside them, creating a peaceful backdrop that belied the danger behind them. As the morning wore on, Vivian found herself studying her companion. Isaiah rode with the easy confidence of a man who had spent most of his life in the saddle. His posture was alert but relaxed, his eyes constantly scanning the terrain around them. "You called yourself the Raven yesterday," she ventured when they stopped to water the horses. "Is that what people know you as?" A shadow passed over Isaiah's face. "It's a name I earned some years back. I was a scout for the army during the war, then a tracker for the territorial marshals after." He avoided her gaze. "I've hunted men like the Claytons before. But you're not a marshal now." "No." His tone discouraged further questions on that topic. "We should keep moving. There's a place up ahead where we can rest for a bit and eat." The spot Isaiah chose for their midday rest was a small clearing near the creek, sheltered by a stand of cottonwoods. As they ate Mrs. Patterson's bread and dried meat, Vivian found herself wondering about the life that had shaped this enigmatic man. There was a controlled strength about him, but also a wariness, as if he was constantly expecting trouble. "How did you come to be in Redemption Creek yesterday?" she asked. It seemed providential. Isaiah took a drink from his canteen before answering. "I was tracking the Clayton gang. They've hit 3 banks and 2 stagecoaches in the past month. The territorial governor has put a bounty on them." "You're a bounty hunter?" Vivian couldn't keep the surprise from her voice. "When necessary." His eyes met hers. "Does that trouble you?" Vivian considered the question. In her Boston upbringing, such a profession would have been considered barely above criminal. But here, in this wild land where law and order were still tenuous concepts, perhaps such men were needed. "I suppose without men willing to bring criminals to justice, there would be no safety for anyone," she said finally. A ghost of a smile crossed Isaiah's face. "A diplomatic answer." "An honest one," she countered. "You saved my life, Mr. Brooks. I'm not in a position to judge how you make your living." He studied her for a moment longer, then nodded. "We should move on. I want to reach Cooper's Crossing by nightfall. There's an old trapper there who owes me a favor he'll give us shelter for the night." As they mounted up again, Vivian couldn't help but ask, "Are there many people who owe you favors, Mr. Brooks?" This time his smile was more genuine. "A few, and out here, that's a kind of wealth that matters more than gold." The afternoon brought a change in the landscape as they began to climb into more rugged terrain. The creek narrowed and quickened, and the trail sometimes disappeared altogether, leaving Isaiah to pick their way forward based on markers Vivian couldn't discern. The beauty of the wilderness around them was breathtaking towering pines, rocky outcroppings, and glimpses of snow-capped peaks in the distance. "It's beautiful," Vivian said softly as they paused at a vista overlooking a valley where the creek wound like a silver ribbon far below. "It is," Isaiah agreed, something in his tone making her look at him. He was gazing at the view with a mixture of appreciation and something deeper, a connection to this land that seemed almost spiritual. "Have you always lived in these territories?" she asked. Isaiah shook his head. "Born in Pennsylvania. My father was a blacksmith. When I was 12, the family moved west to Missouri, looking for better opportunities." His expression grew distant. "When the war came, I was old enough to fight, but chose to scout instead. Afterward, I just kept moving west." "And family?" "None living," he said simply, then nudged his horse forward. "We should keep moving." As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, they descended into another valley where a small cabin stood near the convergence of 2 creeks. Smoke curled from the chimney, and as they approached, an elderly man with a long gray beard emerged, a rifle held casually in his weathered hands. "Who goes there?" he called. "It's Isaiah Brooks Cooper," Isaiah replied, raising a hand in greeting. The old man lowered his rifle, a wide grin splitting his beard. "Well, I'll be the Raven himself." His sharp eyes moved to Vivian. "And with a lady no less. Times must be changing." Isaiah dismounted and helped Vivian down. "This is Miss Vivian Adams. She's in some trouble, and we need a safe place for the night." Cooper's bushy eyebrows rose, but he asked no questions. "Any friend of Isaiah's is welcome here. Come in, come in. I've got rabbit stew on the fire and plenty to share." The cabin was small but surprisingly neat, with pelts hanging from the walls and a sturdy wooden table dominating the main room. The stew, as promised, was plentiful and flavorful. And after the long day's ride, Vivian found herself ravenous. Cooper proved to be a colorful host, regaling them with tales of his decades in the wilderness. "Isaiah here saved my life 2 winters back," Cooper said as they finished their meal. "Found me half frozen in a blizzard after my horse threw me. Carried me 10 miles to the nearest settlement." Vivian glanced at Isaiah, who looked uncomfortable with the praise. "It wasn't 10 miles, Cooper. More like 3. And you weren't that heavy." Cooper cackled, modest as ever. But that's how it is with Isaiah, always showing up when someone needs saving, then acting like it's nothing special. Later, as Cooper showed Vivian to a small alcove curtained off for privacy where she could sleep, the old man spoke in a lowered voice. "Whatever trouble you're in, miss, you couldn't have a better protector than Isaiah Brooks. There ain't a better tracker in the territory, and his gun hand is faster than greased lightning. But more than that, He's a good man, maybe one of the last true good men in these parts. Vivian slept better that night, despite the hard pallet on the floor. Perhaps it was exhaustion, or the security of the cabin's solid walls, or the knowledge that both Cooper and Isaiah were just on the other side of the curtain. When she woke, pale dawn light was filtering through the small window, and she could hear low voices outside. Dressing quickly, she stepped out to find Isaiah and Cooper by the horses, deep in conversation. They fell silent as she approached, and Cooper excused himself to fetch more coffee. "Is something wrong?" Vivian asked, noting the tension in Isaiah's posture. "Cooper says there were 3 riders asking about us at a settlement 10 miles south yesterday evening," Isaiah replied, checking the cinch on his saddle. "The description matches the Clayton gang." Vivian felt her heart drop. How could they have found our trail so quickly? They're good trackers, and they're motivated. Isaiah handed her a cup of coffee that Cooper had brought out. "We'll change our route, head northwest through higher country. It's rougher going, but harder to track." Cooper joined them, carrying a rifle that he handed to Isaiah. "Take this. It's got better range than that army Colt you carry. Might come in handy." Isaiah accepted the weapon with a nod of thanks. As they mounted up to leave, Cooper pressed a small package into Vivian's hands. "Jerky and hardtack," he explained. "And this." He placed a small knife in a leather sheath on top. "Every lady should have protection of her own." The old trapper waved them off as they rode away, and Vivian found herself wondering if she would ever see the kind, eccentric man again. The trail Isaiah chose was indeed rougher than the previous day's journey, a narrow path that wound up into the higher elevations, where the air grew cooler and the vegetation sparser. "The Clayton gang knows these territories," Isaiah explained as they rode, "but they prefer to stick to areas where they can move quickly. Up here, the advantage shifts to those who know how to read the land." "And you know how to read it?" Vivian asked, ducking under a low-hanging branch. Isaiah's expression softened slightly. "My Paiute friends taught me. Spent 2 years living with them after the war, learning their ways." This new piece of information intrigued Vivian. In Boston, the newspapers portrayed Indians as savages to be feared, yet here was Isaiah speaking of them with obvious respect. "Were they good teachers?" she asked. Isaiah glanced at her, perhaps assessing whether her question was sincere. "The best," he finally said. "They understand this land in ways most white men never will. They don't try to conquer it, they live in harmony with it." They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds the creaking of leather, the clop of hooves on rocky ground, and the occasional call of a hawk circling overhead. Vivian found herself watching Isaiah more often than was proper, intrigued by the contradictions he represented. He had the bearing of an educated man, but the skills of a frontiersman. He carried weapons with obvious proficiency, yet showed a gentle consideration that belied the harshness of his profession. By midday they had reached a high plateau that offered views stretching for miles in all directions. As they stopped to rest the horses, Isaiah scanned the landscape with a practiced eye. "No sign of pursuit," he said, "but we'll keep moving. There's a line shack about 5 miles ahead where we can spend the night. It belongs to the Circle D Ranch, but they only use it during the summer grazing." Vivian nodded, trying not to show how the rigors of the journey were affecting her. Her muscles ached from the unaccustomed hours in the saddle, and despite the hat Isaiah had given her from his saddlebags, her face felt sunburned and raw from the wind. Isaiah must have noticed her discomfort. "You're doing well," he said, his voice gentler than usual. "Most Eastern ladies would be complaining by now." "I'm not most Eastern ladies," Vivian replied with a small smile. "My father believed women should be as capable as men. He taught me to ride, to swim, even to shoot, much to my mother's dismay." "A progressive man," Isaiah commented. "Yes, he was a professor at Harvard before consumption took him." She looked out at the vast landscape. "He would have loved this country, its wildness, its possibility." Isaiah studied her for a moment. "You have some of that wildness in you, I think, beneath the proper Boston upbringing." The observation startled Vivian. No one had ever described her that way before, yet something in his words resonated with a truth she had felt but never acknowledged. There had always been a part of her that chafed against the constraints of Boston society, that yearned for something more. "Perhaps," she admitted, "though this journey is testing the limits of that wildness. A genuine smile transformed Isaiah's features, softening the hard lines and bringing a warmth to his blue eyes that Vivian found herself responding to on a level that had nothing to do with their circumstances. "We'll make a proper frontierswoman of you yet, Miss Adams." The line shack was little more than a one-room structure with a small corral attached, but after the long day's ride, it seemed a welcome haven. Isaiah checked it thoroughly before allowing Vivian inside, where they found a crude stone fireplace, a small table with two mismatched chairs, and a set of rough bunks built into the wall. "It's not the Palmer House Hotel," Isaiah said as he lit a fire in the hearth, "but it's solid and dry. And there are no outlaws trying to kill me here," Vivian added, attempting to lighten the mood. "That makes it better than the finest hotel in Boston at the moment." While Isaiah tended to the horses, Vivian swept the dirt floor and arranged their meager supplies. The domestic activity felt oddly comforting after the tension of the day. When Isaiah returned, he brought armfuls of firewood and a rabbit he had snared. "I hope you're not squeamish," he said as he began to dress the animal with practiced efficiency. "After 2 days on the trail with jerky and hardtack, I'm not in a position to be particular about my dinner," Vivian replied, watching his hands work with deft precision. "Though I admit my cooking skills are limited to what can be prepared in a Boston kitchen with a full staff at hand." Isaiah's eyes crinkled at the corners. "Then it's fortunate that mine aren't. 7 years on the frontier teaches a man to cook or starve." As the rabbit roasted over the fire, Vivian found herself studying Isaiah in the flickering light. The flames highlighted the strong line of his jaw, the slight cleft in his chin, the tiny scar above his right eyebrow. There was a story there. She thought perhaps many stories in each mark and line that time and experience had etched upon his face. "You're staring, Miss Adams," he said, without looking up from the fire. Vivian felt a blush warm her cheeks. "I apologize. I was just wondering." "About?" "About what makes a man choose a life like yours. Always moving, always alone." Isaiah was quiet for so long that Vivian thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, reflective. "Some men are meant for settling down, for building something that lasts. Others are meant to wander, to right wrongs where they find them." He turned the rabbit on its spit. "Or maybe some just haven't found a reason to stop wandering yet." There was something in his tone, a loneliness, perhaps that stirred a response in Vivian. She had known her share of loneliness in the years since her parents' deaths, living with an aunt who, while kind, had never understood her. "And what would be reason enough to stop wandering, do you think?" she asked softly. Isaiah's blue eyes lifted to meet hers, and for a moment, something passed between them, a recognition, a possibility. Then he looked away. Back to the fire. "I don't know," he said finally, "but the rabbit's done. We should eat while it's hot." They ate in companionable silence, the simple meal tasting better than any fancy dinner Vivian could remember. Afterward, as they sat before the fire with cups of coffee, Vivian found herself telling Isaiah about her life in Boston, her studies, her love of literature, her growing sense of not belonging in the society she had been raised in. "When my aunt died, it felt like the last tie holding me there was gone," she admitted. Isaac's letters about California, about the freedom and the possibility of the West, seemed like an invitation to a new life. "And then you witnessed a bank robbery," Isaiah said. "Yes, quite the introduction to Western adventure." She smiled ruefully. "Though I suppose meeting you has balanced the scales somewhat." Isaiah's expression softened. "You've handled yourself well, Miss Adams. Many would have broken down after what you've been through." "Vivian," she said impulsively. "Please call me Vivian. After saving my life and sharing a rabbit dinner, I think we can dispense with formalities." A smile ghosted across his face. "Vivian, then." He set his cup down. "We should get some rest. We have another long day tomorrow." As Vivian settled onto one of the narrow bunks, Isaiah spread his bedroll on the floor near the door, positioning himself between her and any potential danger. The gesture wasn't lost on her. "Good night, Isaiah," she said softly, testing the feel of his given name on her lips. In the dim light of the dying fire, she saw him turn his head toward her. "Good night, Vivian," he replied, his deep voice wrapping around her name in a way that made her heart beat a little faster. Sleep came slowly that night. Despite her physical exhaustion, her mind kept returning to the moment by the fire when Isaiah's eyes had met hers, and she had glimpsed something beneath his guarded exterior, a yearning that matched her own. The sound of rain on the roof woke Vivian before dawn. She opened her eyes to find the cabin dimly lit by the glow of a fresh fire. Isaiah sat at the small table, cleaning Cooper's rifle with methodical precision. "Storm's moved in," he said when he noticed she was awake. "We'll wait for it to pass before heading out." Vivian sat up, wincing at the stiffness in her muscles from 2 days of hard riding. "Is it safe to delay?" "Safer than trying to navigate those trails in a downpour." He set the rifle aside. "Besides, the rain will wash away any tracks we've left. Makes us harder to follow." The storm intensified as the morning wore on, rain lashing against the single small window and wind howling around the eaves of the shack. Vivian found herself grateful for the enforced rest, using the time to wash as best she could with rainwater Isaiah collected in a bucket and to change into the clean dress Mrs. Patterson had provided. Isaiah had stepped outside to check on the horses, giving her privacy for these ablutions. When he returned, soaked to the skin despite his oilskin coat, he stopped short in the doorway, his gaze taking in her transformed appearance. "You look," he began, then seemed to catch himself. "The dress suits you." Vivian smoothed the simple blue fabric, suddenly self-conscious under his scrutiny. "Mrs. Patterson has good taste, though I'm afraid it will be ruined by the time we reach Sacramento." Isaiah shrugged out of his wet coat and hung it by the fire. "We can stop in the next town for supplies. You'll need proper riding clothes for the journey ahead." The domestic scene felt strangely intimate, the two of them confined in the small space, the rain creating a curtain that seemed to separate them from the outside world and its dangers. Vivian found herself watching Isaiah as he moved about the cabin, noting the grace with which he handled even the most mundane tasks. There was an economy to his movements, a precision that spoke of a man completely at ease in his own skin. To fill the silence, Vivian asked about the territories they would be traveling through, and Isaiah proved to be a knowledgeable guide, describing landmarks and settlements with the detail of someone who had committed them to memory. As he talked, Vivian began to sketch in her small journal, first the cabin's interior, then the view from the window, and finally, when he wasn't looking, the strong profile of Isaiah himself. "You draw well," he commented, catching her in the act when he returned from another check on the horses. Vivian closed the journal quickly, embarrassed at being discovered. "Just a hobby. My father encouraged it. He said artistic pursuits develop the mind as well as the soul." "May I?" Isaiah held out his hand. After a moment's hesitation, Vivian passed him the journal. He turned the pages carefully, studying each sketch with genuine interest. When he came to the one of himself, he paused, a slight furrow appearing between his brows. "Is this how you see me?" he asked quietly. Vivian looked at the drawing she had captured him in a moment of repose, his expression thoughtful, almost vulnerable, so different from the vigilant protector he presented to the world. "Yes," she admitted. "There's more to you than the raven, Isaiah Brooks." He handed the journal back without comment, but something had shifted in the air between them, a barrier lowered, if only slightly. By mid-afternoon, the storm began to abate, though a steady drizzle continued. Isaiah decided they would remain at the line shack for the night and set out at first light. "We'll make better time on dry trails," he explained as he prepared to venture out to hunt for their dinner, "and the rain will have covered our tracks completely." Left alone in the cabin, Vivian found herself restless. The enforced idleness after days of constant movement and danger made her thoughts turn to what awaited her in Sacramento. Her brother's letters had painted a picture of opportunity and new beginnings, but now, after her experiences of the past few days, she wondered if the structured life he had planned for her, helping in his medical practice, eventually meeting a suitable husband from among his colleagues, would satisfy the awakening sense of adventure she felt. And then there was Isaiah, a man unlike any she had known in Boston. Their time together was temporary, a circumstance of necessity rather than choice. Yet she couldn't deny the growing connection between them. It was more than gratitude for his protection. It was a recognition of something kindred beneath their obvious differences. When Isaiah returned with a brace of grouse, Vivian had built up the fire and set water to boil in the small pot they had found among the shack's meager supplies. "You're becoming quite the frontier woman," he remarked as he set about preparing the birds. "Necessity is an excellent teacher," she replied, "though I fear my Boston friends would be scandalized to see me now." Isaiah glanced up at her, a rare smile lightening his features. "Their loss? There's something to be said for a woman who can adapt to circumstances." As they worked together to prepare the simple meal, the small space seemed to shrink around them. Each casual brush of hands or meeting of eyes charged with an awareness neither acknowledged openly. By the time they sat down to eat, Vivian found herself hyper-conscious of every movement Isaiah made, every inflection in his deep voice as they talked. The conversation turned to their childhoods, Isaiah describing growing up as the son of a blacksmith, learning the trade before the call of the frontier lured him west, and Vivian sharing stories of her scholarly father and socially ambitious mother. They were an unlikely match, she explained. Father was from old money but cared nothing for society. Mother was determined to establish her place in Boston's elite circles. Yet somehow, they balanced each other. "And which parent are you more like?" Isaiah asked, studying her across the small table. Vivian considered the question. "I have my father's love of learning, and my mother's determination, I suppose. But neither of them would have ended up in a line shack in the wilderness with a bounty hunter." Isaiah's expression grew serious. "Do you regret coming west?" "No," Vivian answered without hesitation. "Despite the danger, or perhaps because of it, I feel more alive than I have in years." She met his gaze steadily. "And meeting you has been educational." A flicker of something surprise, perhaps, or pleasure crossed his face before he schooled his features back to their usual reserve. "I'm not sure I'm the best example of Western living," he said dryly. "Most settlers prefer a more stable existence." "Is that not something you want? Stability?" The question was bold, more personal than any she had asked before. But the intimacy of their situation seemed to allow for such directness. Isaiah was silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the fire. "I thought I did once," he finally said. "After the war, I bought land near Laramie, built a cabin, even started breaking horses to sell to the army." His voice took on a distant quality, as if he were speaking of someone else's life. "Then the Claytons came through." Vivian's breath caught. "The same men who are after us now?" Isaiah nodded, his expression hardening. "Different gang members, some have been caught or killed since then, but the same leader, Jed Clayton." His hand tightened around his coffee cup. "They raided the ranch while I was in town. When I got back, everything was gone. Horses, supplies. They'd burned the cabin." A muscle worked in his jaw. "And they'd killed my partner. Good man named Thomas who'd fought alongside me in the war. They shot him in the back when he tried to stop them." "Oh, Isaiah," Vivian whispered, instinctively reaching across the table to cover his hand with hers. "I'm so sorry." He looked down at their joined hands, and for a moment, Vivian thought he might pull away. Instead, he turned his palm upward, his fingers curling around hers. "I've been tracking them ever since," he said quietly. 2 years. I've helped bring in some of the gang, but Clayton himself has always managed to stay one step ahead." The pieces fell into place for Vivian, his presence in Redemption Creek, his immediate understanding of her danger, his determination to help her reach safety. This wasn't just about protecting a witness, it was personal. "That's why you're helping me," she said. "You see a chance to finally catch up to Clayton." Isaiah's blue eyes met hers, intense and unexpectedly vulnerable. "That's why I started helping you," he corrected. "But now," he seemed to struggle for words, unusual for a man who chose his speech so carefully. "Now I find myself concerned with your safety for its own sake, Vivian." The admission hung in the air between them, charged with unspoken meaning. Vivian was acutely aware of his hand still holding hers, of the warmth that spread up her arm from that simple contact. "I'm glad," she said softly, her voice steadier than she felt. "Because I find myself caring what happens to you as well, Isaiah Brooks." For a long moment they sat in silence, connected by clasped hands and newly acknowledged feelings. Then Isaiah gently withdrew his touch, standing to add wood to the fire. "We should get some rest," he said, his voice rough. "Tomorrow will be another long day." As Vivian settled onto her narrow bunk, she knew that something fundamental had changed between them. The journey ahead would be complicated not only by the danger that pursued them, but by the growing bond that neither had expected to form. Outside, the rain had stopped, and in the sudden silence she could hear the drip of water from the eaves and, beneath that, the steady rhythm of Isaiah's breathing as he lay near the door, ever vigilant, ever her protector. Dawn broke clear and cold, the storm having swept away the dust and heat of previous days. As they set out, Vivian noticed a new watchfulness in Isaiah's manner, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon, his hand never far from his weapon. "We'll stop in Granite Gulch this afternoon," he explained as they rode. "It's a small mining settlement, but they'll have supplies we need. After that, we'll be in more remote country for a few days." The trail took them through a landscape transformed by the rain. Wildflowers had appeared overnight in rocky crevices. Streams ran fuller and faster, and the air held a crispness that invigorated both riders and horses. Despite the beauty surrounding them and the growing comfort she felt in Isaiah's company, Vivian couldn't shake the sense of being pursued, of danger drawing closer with each passing hour. Granite Gulch proved to be little more than a cluster of rough buildings serving the needs of the miners who worked the surrounding hills. As they rode down the muddy main street, Vivian was conscious of the curious stares directed their way. A woman was clearly an unusual sight in such a place, particularly one accompanied by a man of Isaiah's obvious frontier capability. They stopped first at a general store, where Isaiah purchased supplies with quiet efficiency ammunition, more food, a small pot and pan, and, to Vivian's surprise, a pair of men's trousers and a sturdy shirt that he handed to her with a practical nod. "You'll be more comfortable riding in these," he said, "and less conspicuous at a distance." The storekeeper, a balding man with spectacles perched on the end of his nose, watched them with undisguised curiosity. "You folks passing through or staying?" he asked as he wrapped their purchases. "Just passing through," Isaiah replied. "Heading to Sacramento." The storekeeper nodded. "You might want to be careful on the Western Trail. Had some men come through yesterday asking about travelers. Rough-looking bunch, not the kind you'd want to meet on a lonely stretch of road." Vivian felt a chill run through her, and beside her, Isaiah stiffened almost imperceptibly. "These men," he said casually, "did they mention who they were looking for?" The storekeeper shrugged. "A woman and a man traveling together. Said the woman was a relative who'd run off with some ne'er-do-well. But they had the look of trouble about them, if you ask me." "Thanks for the warning," Isaiah said, gathering their supplies. "We'll keep an eye out." Outside the store, he loaded the purchases onto the horses while Vivian changed into the men's clothing in a small shed behind the building. When she emerged, feeling strangely liberated by the practical attire despite its impropriety, Isaiah was talking to a lean, weathered man near the town's small stables. "Vivian, this is Hank Jeffries," Isaiah introduced her. "He runs the livery here and knows every trail in these mountains. He's going to draw us a map of a route the Claytons are less likely to know." Hank tipped his hat to Vivian, his shrewd eyes taking in her changed appearance without comment. "Any friend of Isaiah's is a friend of mine," he said. "He saved my nephew from a mountain lion 2 winters back." As Hank sketched a rough map in the dirt with a stick, explaining the lesser-known passes and water sources, Vivian found herself wondering about the network of people whose lives Isaiah had touched during his years in the territories. For a man who claimed to be always moving, always alone, he seemed to have formed connections that ran deep, if not permanent. Their business in Granite Gulch concluded, they set out again, taking a narrow trail that wound up into the mountains west of town. Hank had assured them that this route, while more difficult, was rarely used except by the most experienced local hunters and trappers. "Clayton and his boys stick to the main trails where they can move fast," Isaiah explained, as they picked their way along the steep path. "They're not woodland men. They're riders of the open range." "But they're still following us," Vivian pointed out. Isaiah nodded grimly. "They are, which means they want you badly enough to push beyond their usual territory. Your testimony must worry them even more than I thought." They rode in silence for a time, each lost in their own thoughts. The trail grew steeper, forcing them to dismount and lead the horses through particularly difficult sections. Isaiah moved with the sure-footedness of a mountain goat, always ready with a steadying hand when Vivian struggled with the terrain. By late afternoon, they had reached a high ridge that offered a sweeping view back the way they had come. Isaiah studied the landscape through a small brass spyglass, his expression growing increasingly tense. "What is it?" Vivian asked, noting the hard set of his jaw. "Riders," he said, passing her the spyglass. "5 of them, following our trail from Granite Gulch." Vivian peered through the glass, her heart sinking as she made out the distant figures moving steadily along the path below. "How did they find us so quickly?" "Someone in town must have told them which way we headed," Isaiah replied, taking back the spyglass. "Not everyone's as discerning as Hank about who they share information with." "What do we do now?" Isaiah considered for a moment, his eyes scanning the terrain ahead. "We push on. There's a place Hank mentioned, Devil's Backbone. It's a narrow pass where 2 men could hold off 20. If we can reach it before nightfall, we'll have the advantage." They remounted and urged the horses forward at as rapid a pace as the difficult trail allowed. Vivian could feel the urgency in Isaiah's manner, though he maintained an outward calm that she found reassuring despite their dire situation. The sun was low in the sky, painting the mountains with golden light. When they finally reached the formation known as Devil's Backbone, a narrow ridge of rock with steep drops on either side, creating a natural choke point in the trail. Beyond it, the path descended into a sheltered valley where a small lake gleamed in the fading light. "We'll make camp by the lake," Isaiah decided after surveying the area. "But first, we need to prepare a welcome for our visitors." Under Isaiah's direction, Vivian helped gather loose rocks and fallen timber, which they positioned strategically along the narrowest part of the ridge. The work was hard, but Vivian threw herself into it with determination, understanding that their lives might depend on these preparations. As they worked, Isaiah explained his plan. "We're not trying to kill them, just delay them, make them reconsider whether you're worth this much trouble. If we can pick off 1 or 2, the others might decide to turn back." "And if they don't?" Vivian asked, wiping sweat from her brow. Isaiah's expression was grim. "Then we'll have to make a stand. But the advantage is ours here. They'll have to come at us one at a time through the pass." With their defenses in place, they led the horses down to the lake and made camp in a small clearing sheltered by pine trees. Isaiah built a fire, but kept it small and smokeless, using dry pine needles and small twigs that would produce minimal visibility from a distance. As night fell, they ate a cold supper of jerky and hardtack, neither willing to risk the aroma of cooking food that might carry to their pursuers. The temperature dropped rapidly with the sun, and Vivian found herself shivering despite her proximity to the small fire. Without a word, Isaiah removed his coat and draped it around her shoulders. The garment was warm from his body and carried his scent, leather, wood smoke, and something uniquely him that Vivian found oddly comforting. "Thank you," she said, pulling the coat closer around her. "But won't you be cold?" Isaiah shook his head. "I'm used to it." He added a few more twigs to the fire. "You should try to get some sleep. I'll take first watch, then wake you in a few hours." Vivian wanted to protest that she couldn't possibly sleep with danger so close, but exhaustion from the day's journey and the physical labor of their preparations was already making her eyelids heavy. She settled onto her bedroll, Isaiah's coat serving as both blanket and comfort. "Isaiah," she said softly as sleep began to claim her, "if something happens to me, please make sure my brother knows what became of me. His address is in my journal." In the flickering firelight, she saw Isaiah's expression soften. "Nothing's going to happen to you, Vivian, not while I'm breathing." The simple vehemence of his promise followed her into dreams, where she ran through endless forests, always with Isaiah just ahead, leading her to safety. She woke to Isaiah's hand on her shoulder, his voice urgent in her ear. "They're coming. I can hear horses on the ridge." Fully alert in an instant, Vivian sat up, shrugging off the coat. The fire had burned down to embers, and the night around them was deep and still. She strained her ears and caught what Isaiah had heard, the distant sound of hooves on stone, the occasional clink of metal. "How many?" she whispered. "Can't tell yet. Get your things together quickly. We need to move to the defensive position." Vivian packed her meager belongings with trembling hands while Isaiah saddled the horses and secured their supplies. They moved silently through the trees, leading the animals to a spot Isaiah had selected earlier, a natural hollow in the rocky slope that overlooked the narrow pass but offered cover from anyone approaching. Stay here with the horses, Isaiah instructed, helping her into position. If things go badly, mount up and ride west as fast as you can. Follow the trail Hank marked for us. It will take you to a ranger station in 2 days' time. I'm not leaving you, Vivian protested. Isaiah's expression was unyielding. This isn't a debate, Vivian. Your testimony can put Clayton away for good. That's worth more than my life. Before she could argue further, he pressed Cooper's rifle into her hands. You said your father taught you to shoot. How good are you? Good enough to hit what I aim at, if it's not moving too fast, she admitted. Isaiah nodded. Then, if it comes to it, use this. But only as a last resort. I don't want them to know you're armed unless absolutely necessary. He started to move away, then turned back, his expression softening. In the pale moonlight, Vivian could see a conflict in his eyes, duty warring with something deeper, more personal. For a moment, she thought he might say something more, might acknowledge the unspoken feelings that had grown between them. Instead, he simply nodded once and melted into the shadows with the silent grace that had earned him his nickname. Vivian settled into position, the rifle across her knees, her heart pounding so loudly she feared the approaching riders might hear it. From her vantage point, she could see the narrow pass and the trap they had set. Isaiah was nowhere in sight, but she knew he must be positioned somewhere with a clear shot at the ridge. The sounds of approach grew louder, and then she saw them, 5 riders moving in single file along the treacherous path, their forms dark silhouettes against the night sky. The leader, a tall man on a palomino horse, held up his hand, and the group halted just before the narrowest section of the ridge. I don't like this, Clayton, one of the men said, his voice carrying clearly in the still night air. Feels like a trap. The leader, Clayton himself, scanned the ridge with obvious suspicion. Brooks is too smart to leave an obvious trail unless he wanted us to follow. But he's also too smart to face all of us alone. Maybe he ain't alone, another rider suggested. That Adams woman is a society lady who probably never fired a gun in her life, Clayton interrupted. She's no threat. Vivian's fingers tightened around the rifle, a surge of indignation overriding her fear. She had never considered herself particularly brave, but the dismissive words awakened a determination to prove Clayton wrong.